So, we fear the unknown. We're so afraid of the possibility that things could occur that we have no knowledge of. And we fool ourselves into believing that most of the time we do know what is happening. We don't realize that we have no knowledge of the future. The future is always unpredictable. So, in fact, every step that we take is a step into the unknown, and we don't know what will occur in the next minute. But we get so into our humdrum patterns of life that we take for granted that they will just continue. And we have that expectation that the patterns will continue as they have been for whatever length of time. So, most of us can walk to the kitchen with our eyes closed in the morning. We know where the kettle is, and we know, where the milk is in the fridge. And we take for granted that those patterns will be the same. Even if we go out to work, our transport to work, where we sit in the workplace, who we speak to. And when the patterns don't play out as they should, we are then in a state of shock, because we believe that that's the way life should be. Things should just happen according to those patterns. And we know that very often the unexpected can happen. We live in KZN, in South Africa, and recently we had terrible floods here. And literally within such a short period of time, people lost part of their homes. They no longer had a kitchen that had been there, or a whole house. And we do also realize that as human beings, when that happens, we have coping mechanisms. But at the same time, when we are forewarned about potential problems or predicaments, we become very, very fearful.
Absolutely. And if you think historically, so I'm talking years and years and years and years and years ago, before we had all the technology that we have now that enables us to be forewarned, people would wake up in the morning and they would face the day, and they didn't know what was going to happen. Yes, they could use nature to a certain extent, the stars or the weather or the animals, to try and predict if something was happening. But very often there were things that they didn't know were going to happen, but they still woke up and they went out and they faced their day and dealt with the expected and very often the unexpected. They didn't know what was going to come at them, weather-wise, in any event, if they were going to be attacked by a different tribe or what was coming from any direction. But that didn't stop them from getting up and facing the day and living their lives and carrying on. And that's because they believed in that inner resourcefulness. And what we need to realize is, like you say, we get so fearful when we don't know something, but we have that inner resourcefulness still within us. It hasn't gone away. I think very often we've just become so dependent on the technology around us that can forewarn us and predict things that we rely on it, and we become dependent on it.
That's so true. And, when you refer to situations historically, we know that the people who used their resourcefulness were the ones that survived. They were the survivors. The ones who happened to perhaps be dependent and say, you look after me, didn't fare as well as the others. And I think, Cara, that's so true. And now we are still faced with predicaments. And, they're different predicaments because life is different. So a predicament now could, instead of being attacked in the jungle by a wild animal, it could be being thrown in at the deep end at work when you have to suddenly manage a project and you feel that this is really something that you aren't skilled on and, you have very little knowledge of. And we sometimes then just get into this fear mode. We disregard the fact that we have that inner resourcefulness. We have so much creativity within us to design something new. We have this ability to be proactive, to find solutions to problems and challenges, to find new ways, new methods of applying to situations. So that resourcefulness is there, but it becomes very dormant because we are in this humdrum of just living in the patterns of life where we feel secure. We have this false security.
That's it. And as soon as that security is taken away, as soon as something unfamiliar happens to us, what happens is that, like you say, that fear comes in. And then we don't just feel fearful, then we become nervous and scared. And then we become angry, and then we get frustrated and uptight, and we have all these negative emotions. And we start thinking, but how can I handle this? And this isn't right. And this is not, I don't know what to do. And this is unfamiliar to me. And we start panicking, and that panic then sets in. And instead of us accessing that inner resourcefulness and that inner potential, what happens is that panic starts squashing it, and we feel more and more panic. And the more panicky we feel, the more fearful we become. And the more fearful we become, the more panicky we get. And it's like this cycle that just goes round and round. We say, oh, what am I going to do? This is not what I know, and it's unfamiliar, and I don't know how to deal with the unfamiliar. But if we actually realize we do know how to deal with the unfamiliar, because it's in us, it's in every one of us, that potential is there. That's why we are here today, is because throughout history, people have dealt with the unfamiliar and the unknown, and dealt with it constructively and positively and successfully.
Yes. So when we settle into that mode of being fearful, we are then becoming reactive. We are reacting to the situation and doubting our ability to find a solution. We're doubting our ability to handle it. And that really is that difference between being proactive and being reactive. So, when we think of being positive, sometimes people say, well, if I have a positive mindset, everything in life will just be perfect. But realistically, we know that life isn't perfect. And so we can't be idealistic. But being positive is really about trusting in our own ability to handle a situation. That's what positive self-talk is. Self-talk that doesn't fool us into saying there is no problem. It's self-talk that says, yes, I can handle the problem. I have resources within me. I have some resources surrounding me that I can utilize to manage this situation. And that's what a positive mindset is. Where a negative attitude is that reactive attitude. And, that is where we become angry. We feel that this is unfair. Life has treated us unfairly. And when we are in that negative state, we become very blame-minded, because we feel someone somewhere is to blame and should be responsible for sorting this out for us.
Absolutely. And our first instinct is, I'm not saying we all just are faced with a situation and rise up and say, I will address it. Yes, we do sometimes feel like, oh no, and we do want to go sometimes crawl into the corner and curl up in a little ball and say, I don't want to face this. But the reality is we do have to face it. And running away from it doesn't fix it. And when we start trusting in that ability that we have, and when we start realizing that we can, that every single person has unlimited potential. So when I'm faced with a situation that's unfamiliar, that I haven't been faced with before, or is unusual or strange, if I'm saying I can't deal with this, what I'm actually saying is I've limited my potential. I don't have the ability. That's it. I'm putting a lid on my potential. Whereas if I step back and I say, I can deal with this. It might not be ideal. It might not be what I'm used to. It might not be what I want, but it's the reality. And then I say, okay, so based on this, what is the best possible outcome, and what action can I take to get there, and believe in myself and trust in my ability, my creativity to do that, then I'll be able to. And that's something else that we can learn if we look back historically. All the successful leaders, whether they were leaders of countries or conquerors or emperors or leaders in business or any industry, agriculture, anywhere, they all looked at things differently, and they looked at difficult circumstances and said, how can we address these? How can we take these on? How can we get the best possible result in this situation? And then they did. And if it didn't work the first time, then they looked at it again and said, well, okay, what's an alternative to that? That's one way not to do it. So what else can I do? And if we have that mindset, then straight away we have a much more positive experience.
So what would you say? How would you list the points then on how to practice this resourcefulness, this attitude of awareness of our inner resourcefulness? How do we go about developing that mindset?
I think you have to view every situation from a new perspective. I think you have to look at it and say, I can't just see things the way that I've always seen them. I can't have the same view all the time. I've got to change and look at it from different angles and different perspectives, and not just walk around and blindly like I've got blinkers on and this is the way things are always done. It's being open to new options, looking at new alternatives, looking at new ideas, choosing to be more alert about what is happening around me, preempting things where possible, and we can't always preempt, but trying to preempt situations, and so that I can prepare as best as possible. And like you said, looking at those floods that were in KZN a few months ago, you can't always prepare because things come out of the blue suddenly from nowhere, and that does happen in life. And I'm certainly not saying that if you do what we are discussing now, then your life will be perfect and wonderful. What I'm saying is you'll be able to manage the obstacles a lot more successfully, and you'll feel a lot more confident in your ability to manage and investigate.
I keep losing you. You're freezing a bit, Cara. So, but it's fine now.
You are too. I was hoping.
Oh, really? Okay, but continue.
Yes.
Sorry. Yes.
Must be a Wi-Fi. I don't know. There's an obstacle we weren't expecting. So obviously, Wi-Fi has decided to intervene to give us a practical example.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
But we need to also develop our creative thinking, and I'm not saying creative as in artistic. Yes, that is creative, but creativity is, like we said, looking at new ways of looking at things, new ideas, new opinions, new thoughts, new approaches, not just always doing things in the way that we've done them because that's the way that we've always done them. Stopping and saying, right, is this the best way of doing something? Could it be done better? Is there a more effective way? And that can be anything. I mean, it can be eating habits. It can be the way I run my home. It can be exercise. It can be at work. It can be the way I file my documents. It can be all sorts of things. And just getting into that and not an intense, like I'm going to sit down and analyze and assess now. Just getting into the habit of looking and saying, is my cupboard arranged in the most practical way for my kitchen, or are my files the one, my filing system, is it the best one? And the more we do that, we find that we actually get into that proactive mindset and that questioning and saying, and you know, as humans, we do naturally fall into the routine. And I think especially when times are tough or we are stressed or there's a lot to deal with, we sort of like almost the security of routine. But we need to be aware that it's actually not a security, that it's a false sense of security that routine gives us.
That's right. Because we need to stifle us. It can stifle us. Yeah.
And stifle our creativity. Stop us from being creative and questioning because we get so into the routine that we just sort of plod along and carry on. So I don't know if you would agree with that.
Absolutely. And I think it is. I think what you've said, being more alert, so important to question more, to become more inquisitive, because we become very complacent as well, where we don't question enough. We don't, we decide what is important to us, and we're not inquisitive. We're not interested in anything that isn't relevant to our current situation in life, but perhaps broadening our horizons by becoming more interested in things that we wouldn't normally be interested in, just to expand our general knowledge and our ability to think beyond the current parameters. So that questioning, I think, is so important, and trusting in our ability, knowing that within us is that potential to handle situations. When we rely on others, when we say, well, others need to come along and fix something for us and give us the answers and give us the solutions, we are then obviously very dependent, and that is a reactive mindset. But when we choose to draw on the resources outside of ourselves, so we also don't need to always use the resources within. There's so much expertise and knowledge and experience amongst humans, that we deal with or in our surroundings. And when we make a choice to draw upon that expertise, knowledge, and experience, that isn't dependency. That's an independent, proactive action to utilize those resources. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. Yes, that's it. You know, when I say trust in your potential, I'm definitely not saying that we have to do it all on our own. But it's the difference between saying, you must fix it for me, and saying, you know what, Vida is an expert in the situation. Can I ask her for advice? And that's it. If I'm proactive, I will say, Vida's an expert. Can I ask her for advice? Can I ask her for her input? What would she do? Can I learn from her? That's not reactive. That's proactive. Right. Reactive is saying, Vida, fix it for me. Or Vida, it's your fault that it didn't work.
That's right.
And I think that's it. Being proactive is, because none of us can do everything. So being proactive is utilizing the resources available to us.
And acting from our center. So, you know, when we ask for someone else's advice or opinion or whatever, it doesn't mean that we have to then use that information. Because within our space, we are in control. We've spoken so much about our power of control. We can then choose whether or not to use that information. But it doesn't mean that we shouldn't draw upon that. Sometimes we become a little bit pig-headed. We don't even want to hear the opinions or views of others. And yet those can be very advantageous. It's up to us, you know, how we wish to use those, isn't it? So, Cara, to end off, I mean, really, so if we go back to what we've discussed and we say, well, life is the highway, and we're in our little bubtu driving along the highway of life, we don't know what is waiting around the next corner. We really don't. But we can move forward. We have to venture forward. We have no option. Okay. The life as we experience it is about moving forward. So we continue to move forward and trust in our inner resourcefulness to handle whatever life throws at us along the way. And that's when we are being proactive now.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's exactly it.